My husband told me he was going on a grueling 20-day networking trip to Europe to secure investors for his real estate business. He did not know that I already knew my best friend Melanie was secretly in his hotel suite the entire time. When he finally walked through our front door, dropping his bags and expecting a warm welcome, I did not scream or cry. I simply slid a medical envelope across the kitchen island and asked him one question about a devastating diagnosis. I did not even try to deny it. He turned and ran straight to the doctor. My name is Avery and I am 33 years old. I work as a corporate financial auditor. My entire career is built on finding discrepancies that people try very hard to hide. I track missing funds. I notice when the numbers do not add up. I find the lies buried deep in spreadsheets and expense reports. I do not react to anomalies with emotion. I react with investigation. I gather data. I look for patterns. I build a case so solid that it cannot be refuted. So when my husband Derek started acting strangely a few months ago, my professional instincts naturally kicked in. Derek is 35 years old and the founder of a luxury real estate development firm. He has always been an arrogant man. He is the kind of person who believes he is the smartest person in any room he walks into. Over the past few years, we built a beautiful custom home in an upscale neighborhood in Austin, Tennessee. It has floor-to-ceiling windows, imported Italian marble countertops, and a driveway large enough for his expensive sports cars. To the outside world, we were the perfect power couple. But behind closed doors, Derek was constantly seeking validation, and he recently found it in the worst possible place. Melanie was my best friend. She is also 33, a luxury travel influencer who curates a perfectly filtered life on social media. She always had a taste for the finer things in life usually paid for by other people. I never imagined she would set her sights on my husband. It was a Tuesday evening when Derek was scheduled to return from his solo business trip. For 20 days, I had played the role of the supportive and oblivious wife. I answered his brief phone calls where he complained about exhausting meetings in Paris and long train rides along the Amalfi Coast. I listened to his fabricated stories about difficult investors and late-night strategy sessions. Those 20 days were the longest of my life. During the day, I went to my office and audited corporate mergers. At night, I sat in our massive empty house and audited my marriage. I looked back at the late nights he claimed to be working the weekend retreats. Melanie took that mysteriously aligned with his business trips and the inside jokes they shared at our dinner parties. The signs had been there all along, hiding in plain sight. Earlier that week, I was helping manage some of Melanie's mail while she was supposedly on a brand-sponsored wellness retreat in Bali. A notification from her medical clinic arrived in her digital inbox. As her designated emergency contact, I had access to her patient portal from a time she had a severe allergic reaction last year. I logged in out of habit to make sure she was all right. The test results showed a minor iron deficiency. It was nothing serious at all. But staring at that official clinic letterhead on my screen, a brilliant idea formed in my mind. I needed a test so absolute and shocking that Derek would not have a single second to formulate one of his smooth lies. I printed a blank document, folded it, and placed it inside a replica of the clinic envelope. I was sitting at the kitchen island with my laptop open when I heard the familiar rumble of his engine pulling into the driveway. My heart beat a little faster, but I forced my breathing to remain slow and steady. I had spent the last 3 weeks grieving the end of my marriage in private. Now there was no room for tears or emotional breakdowns. There was only the audit. The front door opened and shut. I heard the heavy thud of his designer luggage hitting the hardwood floor of the foyer. "Avery, I am home," he called out. His voice echoed through the house, carrying that familiar tone of entitlement and confidence. He walked into the kitchen looking tanned and entirely too relaxed for a man who had supposedly spent 3 weeks trapped in windowless boardrooms. The smell of his expensive cologne mixed with the scent of stale airplane air. He wore a crisp white button-down shirt and tailored slacks. He carelessly tossed his suit jacket over a dining chair, fully expecting me to pick it up later. He expected me to rush over, kiss his cheek, and ask him how his stressful trip went. He expected a hot dinner waiting on the stove and a wife eager to hear his stories. I did not look up from my laptop screen. I kept my fingers moving across the keyboard, typing a meaningless document just to maintain the facade of total indifference. "Welcome back," I said quietly. My voice was steady, betraying none of the absolute rage boiling beneath the surface. He paused, clearly thrown off by my lack of enthusiasm. He let out an exaggerated sigh, running a hand through his hair to emphasize how incredibly tired he was. "It was a brutal trip, Avery. Absolutely brutal," he complained, walking closer to the island. "The investors in Paris were completely unreasonable and demanding. I must have slept 4 hours a night the entire time. I just want to take a long hot shower and eat something that does not come from a hotel room service menu. What is for dinner tonight?" I finally stopped typing. I slowly closed my laptop and looked up at him. He was standing near the edge of the kitchen island, a confident smirk playing on his lips. He really believed he had gotten away with it. He believed I was just the practical, boring numbers girl who kept his life stable while he went out and conquered the world with my best friend. I reached beside my laptop and picked up the white envelope bearing the logo of Melanie's health clinic. I looked him dead in the eye and pushed the envelope across the smooth marble surface. It slid silently and stopped exactly an inch from his hand. He looked down at it, his brow furrowing in confusion. Then I delivered the line I had been practicing in my head for days. "Melanie called me sobbing this morning," I said, making sure my voice remained perfectly level and serious. "Her routine panel came back positive for HIV. Did you know?" I watched his face closely. I watched the arrogant smirk vanish in a fraction of a second. The deep tan he had acquired on the Amalfi Coast seemed to wash away instantly, leaving him completely ashen and pale. He stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. For a man who built his entire career on smooth talking and quick pitches, he was suddenly completely speechless. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I took a staggering step back, bumping heavily against the leather bar stool. The car keys he was still holding slipped from his trembling fingers and crashed onto the floor. He did not even bend down to pick them up. The sheer panic in his eyes was absolute and undeniable. His mind was clearly racing, calculating risks, realizing that his own health and life were suddenly in serious jeopardy. The instinct for self-preservation completely overrode his ability to deny the affair or construct an alibi. He looked at me with a gaze full of pure, unadulterated terror, and then he turned around. He did not ask what I meant. He did not ask why I was bringing up my best friend out of nowhere. He did not try to tell me he had no idea what I was talking about. He just turned and sprinted back toward the foyer. I listened to his heavy footsteps pounding against the floorboards, the frantic twisting of the front doorknob, and the heavy door slamming shut behind him. He had a spare key fob in his pocket. Seconds later, I heard his car engine roar to life. The tires squealed violently against the pavement as he reversed out of our long driveway at top speed, racing straight toward the nearest medical clinic. The silence that settled over the house was profound and incredibly satisfying. I stood up from my stool, walked calmly through the hallway, and turned the deadbolt on the front door. The loud click echoed in the quiet space. I leaned against the heavy wood and allowed myself a genuine smile. Melanie did not have HIV. She just needed to take a daily iron supplement. But Derek did not know that. I had set a trap, and his own guilt had pushed him right into it. He had confirmed everything I knew without uttering a single word. My heart was completely broken, but my mind was sharper than ever. He thought he was playing a game with a naive wife. He was about to find out what happens when a corporate financial auditor decides to balance the scales. The first 24 hours after Derek fled our house set the tone for the next 2 weeks. He completely vanished. He did not answer my calls or respond to my text messages. His location sharing on his phone was turned off within 10 minutes of him speeding out of our driveway. I checked our joint bank accounts and saw a single charge for a downtown hotel room. He was isolating himself, hiding out in a sterile room, while he waited out the mandatory incubation period for a rapid test. I was entirely consumed by his own terror, leaving me sitting in the silence of our massive custom-built house. But I did not spend that silence weeping. I spent it working. By the third day of his sudden disappearance, my phone finally rang. It was not Derek. The caller ID flashed with a picture of Melanie smiling brightly from a trip we had taken to Napa Valley last summer. I took a deep breath, smoothed my features even though she could not see me, and answered with the warm, concerned tone of a best friend. Melanie sounded frantic from the second she spoke. She asked if I had heard from Derek, claiming she needed to speak with him about a mutual friend's upcoming birthday party. Her voice was trembling. I knew exactly why she was shaking. Derek had vanished on her, too likely too paralyzed by fear to even explain why he was suddenly treating her like a walking biohazard. I leaned into my role perfectly. I told her I was so worried about him. I explained that he came home from Europe looking incredibly pale and sick, and that he rushed out to see a doctor immediately. I lowered my voice to a hushed whisper and told her I was terrified he had contracted something serious abroad. I heard the sharp, sudden intake of breath on the other end of the line. Melanie practically choked on her own words as she hastily agreed that he must just be resting and abruptly ended the call. Over the next week, she blew up my phone every single day. She texted me constantly asking for updates on his health, trying to disguise her sheer panic as friendly concern. I fed her vague, terrifying updates about unknown infections and waiting for blood work. I kept her twisting in the wind, trapped in the nightmare she had created for herself. While Derek sweated in a hotel room and Melanie spiraled into a panic, I turned my attention to the numbers. As a corporate financial auditor, I know that people can lie, but numbers never do. Money leaves a trail, a digital footprint that paints a perfectly accurate picture of a person's priorities. Derek had always been careless with his digital security at home, trusting that his boring accountant wife would never snoop through the brilliant visionary's files. He left his primary tablet synced to his company's cloud drive. It took me less than an hour to bypass his basic passwords and access the master ledger for his luxury real estate development firm. What I found inside those spreadsheets was far worse than a simple affair. Derek was not just a cheating husband, he was a thief. I opened the expense reports for his so-called European networking trip. He had categorized the expenses under investor outreach and site acquisition research. But as I pulled the itemized receipts from the digital trash folder, he thought he had permanently deleted the truth stared back at me in high definition. There were no meetings with French investors or Italian architects. There was only a $65,000 trail of pure self-indulgence. I tracked every single dollar. I found the receipt for a sprawling luxury suite overlooking the cliffs in Amalfi, booked for a full week. I found the charges for private yacht charters, Michelin-starred dinners and vintage champagne. I traced the flights. 2 first-class tickets to Paris, one in his name and one in Melanie's. He had used the venture capital seed funds provided by his investors to finance a massive romantic getaway with my best friend. He was building his real estate empire on a foundation of stolen money, carelessly siphoning off funds from the very people who trusted him to deliver a $50 million luxury condo project. I sat in my home office for hours, downloading every receipt, every invoice, and every manipulated spreadsheet. I organized them into neatly labeled encrypted folders on an external hard drive. I built a forensic financial profile so damning that it would hold up in any federal court. But my investigation did not stop at his business accounts. If he was arrogant enough to leave a trail of embezzlement on a synced device, I knew there was more to find. I wanted to know exactly how long he had been playing me for a fool. On the 10th day of his absence, I started digging through the hidden partitions on his personal laptop. I bypassed the hidden folders disguised as tax documents and architectural blueprints. Deep inside a subfolder labeled Project Beta, I found a collection of legal documents that made the blood freeze in my veins. It was not more evidence of his affair. It was a completely drafted set of divorce papers. I opened the document and read through the legal jargon. The documents were meticulously detailed and heavily skewed in his favor. According to this drafted settlement, I would walk away with nothing but my personal vehicle and a meager payout. He had structured the paperwork to claim that the house we built together belonged entirely to his company, a business he started before we got married. He was trying to strip me of any claim to our shared assets, leaving me entirely empty-handed while he prepared to take his real estate development firm public. But the most chilling part was not the aggressive terms of the settlement. It was the date printed at the top of the document. The files had been created and saved 3 entire months before his trip to Europe. This was not a sudden lapse in judgment. This was not a man who made a mistake and got swept up in a fleeting romance with another woman. This was a premeditated, calculated execution of our marriage. Derek had been sitting across from me at the dinner table, smiling and asking about my day, while secretly paying a bulldog lawyer to figure out the cheapest way to discard me. He had planned to blindside me. He wanted to go on his lavish European vacation with his mistress, funded by stolen investor money, and then come home and hand me an eviction notice. I read through the documents 3 times, absorbing the sheer malice of his plan. Any lingering sadness I had felt over the loss of my marriage evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharpened resolve. Derek thought he had accounted for every variable. He thought he was 10 steps ahead of the boring wife who paid the household bills while he chased his grand visions. But he had made a fatal miscalculation. He forgot what I do for a living. I do not just read contracts, I dismantle them. I spent the remaining 4 days of his self-imposed exile preparing my response. I did not shed a single tear. I did not reach out to ask him when he was coming home. I let the clock tick down. I knew the rapid test results for his imaginary disease would come back negative eventually. I knew that once a doctor assured him he was perfectly healthy, his terror would evaporate and his arrogance would return. He would realize that the medical envelope was a fake. He would realize that I knew about Melanie. And knowing Derek, he would not come back with his tail between his legs to beg for forgiveness. He would come back angry, aggressive, and ready to deploy the cruel exit strategy he had been planning for months. I packed a single suitcase and left it in the master closet. I took the black external hard drive holding his entire financial ruin and placed it securely in my briefcase. I arranged the kitchen exactly as it had been the day he left. Then I sat at the island, opened my laptop, and waited. The 14 days of silence were coming to an end. Derek was about to walk back into this house believing he still held all the power. I was ready to show him exactly what it meant to be audited. The sound of a heavy car engine rumbling up the driveway broke the quiet isolation of the 15th day. I remained seated at the kitchen island with my hands resting flat on the cool marble surface. I listened as the car door slammed shut outside, followed almost immediately by the distinct sound of a second door closing right after it. He had not come home alone. The front door unlocked with a sharp click and swung open, pushing a breeze of warm outside air into the foyer. Derek walked into the house, but the frantic and terrified man who had sprinted out of this exact room 2 weeks ago was completely gone. In his place was the arrogant real estate developer I had married, returning with his shoulders pulled back and his chin held high. He walked with a slow and deliberate stride that was meant to project absolute authority. Right behind him stepped Melanie. My former best friend walked into my home with a sickening level of confidence. She wore a designer trench coat and carried a luxury handbag that I knew for a fact was purchased with stolen investor funds. She did not look guilty or ashamed or even slightly apologetic for destroying a decade of friendship. She looked like a woman who believed she had just won the ultimate prize. She paused in the entryway to admire herself in the large decorative mirror, taking her time to smooth her hair before following Derek into the kitchen. They stood side by side across the island from me. Derek looked healthy and thoroughly relieved. The rapid blood test must have come back negative, giving him the all-clear he desperately needed to shed his panic and replace it with righteous indignation. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He tossed them onto the marble island with a loud, heavy thud that echoed through the high ceilings of the kitchen. "You really thought you were so clever, Avery," he said, his voice dripping with intense condescension. "You thought you could make up a psychotic lie about a terminal disease to scare me, to ruin my business trip, and manipulate me into staying home. Melanie got tested too. We both know you fabricated the entire thing because you are deeply unstable and jealous of the connection we share." I looked down at the documents he had thrown on the counter. They were the exact same divorce papers I had already found on his hidden hard drive. The ones he had paid a lawyer to draft 3 months before he ever booked that flight to Paris. He was using the medical envelope lie as his convenient excuse to drop the axe he had been sharpening for an entire quarter. He wanted to spin a narrative where my supposed mental instability was the catalyst for the divorce, completely erasing his months of premeditated betrayal. "Sign the delivery receipt," he demanded, pushing a single piece of paper toward me along with a silver pen. "I am done with this marriage, Avery. I am done dealing with a cold, calculating woman who would invent a vicious medical crisis just to ruin my life." Melanie actually supports my vision. She understands the pressure I am under to build a $50 million real estate empire. "You just sit here crunching numbers and dragging me down." Melanie stepped out from behind his shoulder and walked casually into the living room. She ran her hand along the back of my imported Italian leather sofa, the one I had spent months sourcing and paying for with my own salary. She sat down, crossing her legs and letting out a soft, dramatic sigh of comfort, as if she had lived here her entire life. "It really is for the best, Avery," Melanie said, her tone dripping with fake sympathy. "Derek needs a partner who matches his energy. You were always just a bit too rigid for him. You will be much happier once you accept that you two just outgrew each other." I kept my expression completely blank. I did not raise my voice. I did not demand to know how she could betray a decade of friendship. I did not ask Derek how he could look me in the eye and lie about his timeline when the date printed on those legal papers proved he had been planning to blindside me for months. Emotional outbursts were exactly what they wanted. They wanted me to scream and throw things so Derek could call his bulldog lawyer and report that his soon-to-be ex-wife was acting erratic and dangerous. They wanted a dramatic reaction they could use against me in court to justify his heavily skewed settlement offer. I refused to give them a single usable emotion. Instead, I picked up the silver pen. I looked at the thick stack of divorce papers designed to strip me of everything I had helped build. According to his lawyer, he was generously allowing me to keep my own car while he retained full ownership of this custom-built house and his business. I smoothly signed my name on the delivery receipt, acknowledging that I had been officially served. Derek looked momentarily confused by my lack of resistance. He had clearly braced himself for a screaming match. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a single finger, silencing him before he could utter another word. "If you are serving me with these papers, I assume you want me out of the house," I said, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any warmth. "You have 1 hour to pack whatever fits in your car," he replied, his arrogance quickly returning now that he saw I was complying with his demands. "This house belongs to my company, Avery. I bought the land before we got married. I need you gone by the time my investors come over for drinks this evening. Melanie and I have a lot of planning to do for the grand opening gala next week." I nodded slowly. I stood up from the bar stool and walked out of the kitchen, leaving them standing in the silence of their own perceived victory. I walked upstairs to the master bedroom, where my single suitcase was already fully packed and waiting in the closet. I did not need an hour. I did not need to frantically grab my belongings or figure out where I was going to sleep tonight. I had spent the last 14 days securing a luxury apartment downtown and moving my most valuable personal assets out of the house in small, untraceable batches. I pulled my suitcase out of the closet and walked over to the digital safe hidden behind a full-length wall mirror. I typed in the code, retrieved my passport, and took out the specific black external hard drive I had been working on all week. It was small enough to fit into the side pocket of my leather briefcase, but it held the weight of a federal indictment. It contained every stolen receipt, every fake expense report, every hidden offshore transfer, and the undeniable proof that Derek was embezzling venture capital funds to pay for his lavish affair. I zipped my briefcase shut and gripped the handle of my suitcase. I walked back downstairs, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floors. Derek and Melanie were still in the living room. Melanie was pointing at the custom drapery, discussing how she wanted to change the color scheme to something brighter. Derek was leaning against the stone mantel, looking incredibly pleased with how smoothly he had executed his exit strategy. I rolled my suitcase to the front door and paused. I turned around to face them one last time. They stopped talking and looked at me, expecting some final desperate plea or a tearful goodbye. They wanted to see me break so they could feel justified in their cruelty. I looked at the beautiful home I had spent years turning into a sanctuary. I looked at the man who thought he had outsmarted a professional auditor. I looked at the former best friend who thought she had secured a golden ticket to high society. I felt no sorrow. I only felt the cold, calculated anticipation of the grand opening gala, where all of his precious investors would finally learn the truth about where their money had really gone. "Enjoy the house, Derek," I said evenly. "I hope you kept the receipts." I left the house behind without a single backward glance. The drive to my new apartment took less than 20 minutes, but it felt like crossing into an entirely different dimension. I had signed the lease on a luxury penthouse in downtown Austin 3 days prior. It was a sleek, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. I unpacked my single suitcase, hung up my tailored suits, and ordered a simple dinner. I slept better that night than I had in months. There was no tossing and turning, no waiting for a lying husband to come home, and no agonizing over suspicious text messages. I woke up the next morning feeling sharp-focused and entirely in control. I dressed in a crisp navy blazer and matching trousers, preparing for a long day of meetings at my firm. I needed a strong coffee before facing the partners, so I grabbed my leather briefcase and headed down to the lobby. The lobby of my new residential building was supposed to be highly secure. It featured a 24-hour concierge desk, pristine marble floors, and restricted key fob access for the elevators. But as the polished metal doors slid open on the ground floor, I saw a familiar, highly unwelcome figure pacing near the velvet seating area. It was Barbara, my mother-in-law. She was 62 years old, dressed in her usual uniform of a pastel cashmere cardigan, perfectly pressed slacks, and a string of authentic pearls. She clutched a heavy designer handbag so tightly against her chest that her knuckles were completely white. Her eyes darted around the expansive lobby until they locked onto me. The moment she spotted me stepping out of the elevator, her face contorted with absolute fury. She did not bother to greet me or wait for me to approach. She marched across the marble floor, the sharp clicks of her low heels echoing loudly in the cavernous space. The concierge looked up from his monitor, clearly startled by her aggressive approach and ready to intervene, but I gave him a subtle wave of my hand to let him know I would handle the situation. I stood my ground, keeping my posture perfectly straight, and waited for the storm to hit. "Avery, what is wrong with you?" Barbara hissed, keeping her voice just low enough to avoid causing a massive public scene, but lacing every single syllable with venom. "How dare you make up such a vile, disgusting lie about a terminal disease? You terrified Derek. You nearly ruined his homecoming. You sent him into an absolute panic for no reason other than your own bitter, petty jealousy." I looked at her, noting the absolute, unwavering conviction in her eyes. Derek had run straight to his mommy the moment he realized I was not going to play the weeping, devastated wife. He had painted himself as the innocent victim of a psychotic, unhinged woman, and Barbara had eagerly swallowed every single word without a second thought. "I did not make up a disease, Barbara," I replied calmly, adjusting my grip on my briefcase. "I conducted a stress test on your son's conscience. He failed spectacularly. If he had not been sleeping with my best friend, he would not have sprinted to a medical clinic in a blind panic the second he walked through the door." Barbara scoffed, waving her hand dismissively in the air, as if my entire decade of loyalty and financial support meant absolutely nothing to her. "Do not act like you are so innocent in this disaster," she sneered, stepping dangerously close to my personal space. "You drove him to it. Derek is a visionary developer. He is building a massive legacy in this city. He operates on a completely different level of genius, and he needs a partner who understands that kind of pressure. You never did. You are just an uptight number cruncher. You come home, talk about spreadsheets, and expect him to be satisfied with a boring, predictable life. Melanie actually supports his dreams. She makes him happy. She has the warmth and the social grace that you always lacked." Her words were deliberately crafted to cut me to the bone. For years, Barbara had made passive-aggressive comments about my career. She always viewed my work as a corporate financial auditor as tedious and unglamorous, especially compared to Derek's flashy real estate ventures. She loved bragging to her country club friends about her son, the brilliant CEO, conveniently ignoring the fact that my steady, reliable income was the only thing that kept a roof over his head during his first 3 failed startup attempts. She saw me as the starter wife, the practical stepping stone he needed before he could upgrade to someone who fit his new wealthy aesthetic. Someone exactly like Melanie who curated a perfect fake life for an audience of strangers. In Barbara's twisted mind, Melanie was the ultimate prize for her successful son, and I was just the bitter dead weight holding him back. You think Melanie supports his dreams? I asked, my voice remaining perfectly conversational and completely devoid of any emotional injury. You genuinely think she is the supportive, loving partner he always needed to reach his full potential? Of course she is! Barbara snapped, crossing her arms defensively over her cashmere sweater. She understands the real estate world. She travels with him on his important networking trips. She makes sure he is relaxed and focused so he can close $50 million deals. You just nagged him about budgets and practical expenses. You suffocated his potential for years. Now he is finally free to build his empire, and you are acting like a crazy, vindictive ex-wife trying to ruin his professional reputation out of pure spite. I let her finish her tirade. I let her lay out all her elitist delusional beliefs about her golden child son. I did not interrupt her, and I did not raise my voice to defend myself. When she finally ran out of breath and stood there glaring at me, I unlatched the top of my leather briefcase. I reached inside and pulled out a single sheet of premium paper. It was not a rough draft or a sketchy screenshot printed from a cell phone. It was a certified itemized itinerary of Derek and Melanie's European vacation, printed directly from his company's master financial ledger. I held the paper out to her, keeping my hand perfectly steady. Barbara frowned, refusing to take the document at first. "What is this?" she demanded, eyeing the paper suspiciously. "More of your fabricated nonsense meant to upset me." I stepped closer and pressed the document firmly into her hand, forcing her fingers to close around it. "I suggest you actually read it, Barbara. Look at the top right corner. Look at the specific account number that funded this little romantic networking getaway." Barbara reluctantly looked down at the paper. She pulled her designer reading glasses from the collar of her sweater and slipped them onto her face. Her eyes scanned the columns of numbers, the dates, the exotic locations. I watched as her gaze hit the final total at the bottom of the page, $65,000. I watched as she read the billing source clearly printed next to the total. "That trip was not funded by his incredible success," I explained, keeping my tone deadly quiet and incredibly precise. "He did not close a single deal in Europe. He spent 3 weeks drinking vintage champagne on a private yacht in Amalfi and buying designer bags in Paris. And he paid for every single cent of it using the venture capital seed fund provided by his investors for the luxury condo project." Barbara's face went completely slack. The angry, righteous mother-in-law vanished in an instant, replaced by a terrified woman staring at hard, irrefutable evidence of a massive federal felony. She tried to speak, but she just sputtered, shaking her head in desperate denial. "This cannot be right," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Derek would never do this. He is a visionary." "He is not a visionary, Barbara," I said smoothly, stepping back toward the glass doors of the lobby. "He is an embezzler. He is a thief who is stealing from very powerful, very dangerous people to fund a lavish lifestyle with his mistress. And you might want to ask your brilliant visionary son, whose name is actually on the deed to that custom house he loves so much." I did not wait for her to process the final devastating blow. I simply stepped around her, walked out into the bright morning sunlight, and headed toward my office. The walk to my office took exactly 12 minutes. I used that time to clear my mind of Barbara and her frantic denials. I needed to be entirely focused for the workday ahead. My auditing firm occupies the top 3 floors of a sleek glass building in the financial district. I swiped my badge at the security turnstile and rode the elevator up to the executive level. Usually the morning atmosphere is a quiet hum of productivity. People sip their coffee and review overnight market reports. But as I stepped off the elevator and walked down the main corridor, I noticed an immediate shift in the energy. Groups of junior analysts suddenly stopped talking as I passed. A few of my colleagues quickly averted their eyes, pretending to be deeply engrossed in their computer screens. My assistant looked up at me with an expression of pure pity and handed me my morning coffee without her usual cheerful greeting. I walked into my private office and closed the door behind me. I sat down at my desk and unlocked my computer. Before I could even open my email client, my personal cell phone buzzed with a dozen notifications. They were messages from acquaintances and distant relatives asking if I was okay. A few included links to a social media platform. I tapped the first link and watched my own personal tragedy being broadcast to the world as a carefully curated performance. Melanie had posted a video that morning. She was sitting on the edge of the bed in a hotel room. She wore an oversized sweater that looked perfectly effortless, and her makeup was styled to make her look exhausted and deeply wounded. She looked directly into the camera with tear-filled eyes and delivered a masterclass in manipulation. She told her thousands of followers that she was speaking out because she could no longer hide the truth from her community. She painted herself and Derek as two victims of an inevitable meant-to-be love story. She claimed they had tried to be respectful, but that I had lost my mind with jealousy. According to Melanie, I was a toxic and vindictive ex-wife who could not handle the fact that my husband had found his true soulmate. She cried genuine-looking tears as she told her audience that I had hacked into their private accounts and stolen their personal information. She claimed I was threatening to ruin Derek's brilliant career just to punish them for falling in love. Below her video, Derek had posted a lengthy statement of his own. He echoed every single one of her lies. He wrote about how difficult it had been to live with a cold and calculating woman for so many years. He claimed I was mentally unstable and that my hacking of his accounts was a terrifying violation of his privacy. He urged his professional network to disregard any vicious rumors I might try to spread about his business. I scrolled through the comment section watching mutual friends and strangers alike tear me apart. They called me bitter. They called me psychotic. They praised Melanie for her bravery and wished Derek success in his new happy life. They were launching a massive coordinated smear campaign to discredit me before I could ever expose the truth about the embezzled funds. If everyone believed I was a crazy, jealous hacker, no one would believe a word I said about his stolen investor money. My instinct as a human being was to defend myself. I wanted to type out a massive response posting the receipts of their stolen vacation and exposing the exact timeline of their betrayal. But the auditor inside me knew better. Arguing with liars on the internet is a waste of resources. It only alerts your target that you are engaging with their distractions. I closed the application on my phone and set it face down on my desk. I would not give them the satisfaction of a public reaction. I would let them build their house of cards as high as they wanted. 10 minutes later, my office phone rang. It was the administrative assistant for the senior partners. She informed me that the managing director needed to see me in the main conference room immediately. The tone of her voice was tight and professional, leaving no room for questions. I gathered my notepad and walked down the long hallway toward the glass-walled boardroom. When I walked inside, I found 3 of the senior partners seated around the heavy mahogany table. They did not offer me a seat. The managing partner, a stern man named Richard, looked at me with a deeply troubling expression. He folded his hands together and leaned forward. He told me that they had just received a very disturbing phone call from the legal team representing my husband. Richard explained that Derek was threatening to sue our firm for corporate espionage. Derek had told the partners that I was using the firm's proprietary auditing software and secure network resources to illegally hack into his real estate company databases. He claimed I was conducting an unauthorized and illegal investigation to manufacture false financial discrepancies and ruin his upcoming commercial launch. The threat of a lawsuit involving corporate espionage was severe. It could damage the firm's reputation and jeopardize our contracts with major financial institutions. The partners looked at me, waiting for an explanation. They expected me to panic. They expected me to beg for my job and swear that I had never misused company resources. They looked at me as a potential liability who had let her messy personal life bleed into the sterile environment of corporate finance. I pulled out one of the leather chairs and sat down, crossing my legs and folding my hands in my lap. I looked directly at Richard, making sure my voice carried absolute professional authority. I told them that Derek was lying. I assured them that I had never used a single piece of firm software or any company server to look into my husband's finances. I explained that Derek had simply been careless enough to leave his company's cloud drive synced to a personal device inside our shared home. I had accessed his files legally as his spouse, using equipment that belonged to our household. There was no corporate espionage. There was only a desperate man trying to intimidate my employer into firing me. The partners seemed slightly relieved but still incredibly cautious. Richard warned me that the firm could not afford to be dragged into a highly publicized divorce battle involving one of the city's most prominent real estate developers. He suggested that it might be best for me to take an extended leave of absence until the dust settled and the rumors on social media died down. He was politely asking me to hide. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out a thick, sealed file. I had prepared it the night before, anticipating that Derek would try to attack my professional standing. I slid the heavy file across the mahogany table until it rested right in front of Richard. I told him he needed to look inside before making any decisions about my future at the firm. Richard broke the seal and opened the file. The other two partners leaned in to inspect the documents. Inside were the comprehensive financial summaries I had built, detailing Derek's massive embezzlement. I had included the false expense reports, the luxury vacation receipts, and the clear evidence that Derek was siphoning off venture capital seed money. I sat back in my chair and addressed the partners with absolute calm. I told them to ignore the social media noise. I told them to ignore the tearful videos and the fake outrage. Derek is launching a $50 million luxury condo project next month, I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. Let him talk. When he falls, we are going to catch the pieces. The managing partner looked at the files, then looked at me. The tension in the room instantly evaporated, replaced by the cold, calculating silence of corporate sharks smelling blood in the water. Richard simply nodded and told me to get back to work. I walked out of that boardroom knowing my professional reputation was absolutely secure. Derek had tried to use my employer as a weapon, but he had only succeeded in giving them a front-row seat to his upcoming destruction. They were businessmen first and foremost, and they knew a sinking ship when they saw one. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, Derek made his next move. I was sitting at my desk reviewing a complex client portfolio when my personal cell phone buzzed against the polished wood. It was an automated text message from our primary bank alerting me that the joint checking account had been locked due to suspicious activity. A minute later, a second message arrived from the credit card company. The platinum card I used for daily household expenses had been reported lost or stolen by the primary account holder and was immediately deactivated. My phone began to vibrate constantly in short, frantic bursts as every single shared financial lifeline we had was systematically severed. I placed my phone on the desk and watched the screen light up with denial after denial. Derek was executing a textbook financial chokehold. It is a common and brutal tactic used by abusive spouses during a bitter divorce. The entire goal is to cut off all access to liquid capital, panic the victim, and force them into submission out of sheer desperation. He wanted me to realize that I could not afford to buy groceries, pay for a hotel room, or hire a competent lawyer to fight back. He fully expected me to call him in tears, begging him to unlock the account so I could survive the week. He wanted me broken. Instead of calling him, I simply silenced my phone, flipped it face down, and went back to my spreadsheets. An hour later, the front receptionist buzzed my office to let me know a courier had arrived with a package requiring my direct signature. I walked out to the bright lobby and signed for a thick, heavy manila envelope bearing the embossed gold logo of one of the most aggressive family law firms in the city. Derek had hired a notorious bulldog attorney, a man known exclusively for bullying spouses into terrible one-sided settlements. I took the envelope back to my office, closed the door, and sliced the heavy paper open. The document inside was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. It was a formal settlement offer completely bypassing any standard mediation process. According to the dense legal paperwork, Derek was willing to offer me a one-time buyout of exactly $20,000. In exchange for this miserable, insulting sum, I would have to sign away my rights to our custom-built house, my claim to any portion of his real estate development firm, and my right to seek any future spousal support. But the most important clause was buried deep on the fourth page. It was a strict, comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. If I signed the papers and took his $20,000, I would be legally bound to never speak a single word about his finances, his highly questionable business practices, or his ongoing affair with Melanie. I was trying to buy my total silence for absolute pennies. He actually believed that freezing my credit cards would make me so frantic for cash that I would blindly sign away a decade of marriage just to pay my rent. I folded the documents, placed them neatly in my desk drawer, and turned the key. I did not feel a single ounce of panic. I only felt a deep, steady resolve. When I finally left the office that evening, the air was warm and heavy with impending rain. I decided to walk the few blocks to my new downtown apartment, needing the fresh air to clear my mind. As I waited at a busy crosswalk, my phone buzzed with a message from a mutual acquaintance who had always thrived on neighborhood gossip. The text simply said that I desperately needed to see what Melanie was posting online. Against my better judgment, I clicked the attached link. It opened directly to Melanie's social media story. She had recorded a high-definition video of herself sitting behind the steering wheel of my leased luxury sport utility vehicle. The pristine leather interior was unmistakable. She was wearing oversized designer sunglasses and smiling broadly as she drove through the manicured wrought iron gates of the most exclusive country club in the entire city. The caption floating across the bottom of the video read that she was treating her incredibly hard-working man to a celebratory steak dinner because the truth always wins. She made sure to tag the exact location, flaunting the blatant fact that she was parading around town in the vehicle I had personally picked out, living the lavish, carefree lifestyle she believed she had finally secured for herself. Melanie was putting on a highly public show of absolute victory for her followers and for me. She honestly thought she had stolen the billionaire lifestyle she had always craved. She looked at Derek and saw a wealthy visionary who was going to elevate her to the very top of high society. She had absolutely no idea that the luxury car she was driving, the expensive country club dinners she was eating, and the massive diamond ring she was likely already expecting were all funded by a fragile house of cards that was rapidly catching fire. She was celebrating on the deck of a sinking ship. I walked the rest of the way to my secure apartment building and rode the private elevator up to my penthouse suite. I poured myself a tall glass of sparkling water, walked over to the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows, and looked out over the glittering city lights spreading out below me. My phone buzzed one more time on the kitchen counter. It was another automated alert, telling me that a routine direct debit for my monthly gym membership had failed because the primary funding account was frozen. I looked down at the bright notification screen and actually smiled. Derek truly believed he had successfully cut off my only lifeline. He thought he had backed a boring, practical corporate auditor into a dark corner she could not possibly escape. But he clearly did not understand how a senior financial auditor manages her own household and her own future. I had seen the writing on the wall long before he ever packed his designer bags for his fake networking trip to Europe. I did not sit around and wait for the axe to fall. A full week before I ever slid that fake medical envelope across our kitchen island, I had completely decoupled my assets. Every single dollar I had earned, every corporate bonus I had received, and every personal investment I had, carefully made over the last decade, had been quietly and legally transferred out of our joint accounts. I walked over to my pristine kitchen counter and opened my personal laptop. I did not log into our shared retail bank to look at zeros. Instead, I navigated to a highly secure private portal for a commercial holding company. I typed in my complex credentials and watched the secure dashboard load on the screen. The monitor displayed the current robust balance and the highly active portfolios of a private entity called Apex Holdings. It was a private limited liability company registered entirely and solely in my name. Derek thought he had starved me out, but he had no earthly idea I was sitting securely on a massive fortress of liquid capital. He had proudly handed me his insulting settlement offer, assuming I was weak and desperate. Now I was going to use my quiet, boring money to buy the exact legal ropes he would inevitably use to hang himself. I closed the secure holding company portal and opened a brand new blank spreadsheet on my desktop. Having total financial security was only the very first step in my process. To completely dismantle an arrogant man like Derek, I needed to understand every single structural weakness hidden inside his grand $50 million luxury condo project. Derek built his reputation on glossy architectural renderings and charismatic pitches to wealthy investors. But as a financial auditor, I know appearances are expensive to maintain. Over the next 3 days, I turned my new apartment into a war room. I printed out every ledger, every expense report, and every bank statement from his synced cloud drive. I taped them to a massive corkboard I mounted against the wall. I began cross-referencing his internal accounting with public property records and municipal construction permits. The deeper I dug into the condo project, the more the illusion shattered. Derek had secured $20 million in initial venture capital, but the ledgers told a horrific story of gross mismanagement. He was not just skimming a little off the top, he was hemorrhaging money. I traced wire transfers from the primary construction accounts into a web of obscure shell companies. From those companies, the money flowed directly into his personal checking accounts. High used investor funds to pay for his imported sports car lease, his massive mortgage, and Melanie's newly upgraded luxury lifestyle. The financial theft was not even the most dangerous part of his scheme. As I scrutinized the municipal building permits, I noticed something terrifying. Several of the crucial environmental impact reports and structural zoning approvals had missing verification stamps. I pulled up the digital copies he had saved on his drive. I zoomed in on the signatures of the city inspectors. They were perfectly pixel for pixel identical. Derek had copied and pasted the digital signatures from old approved projects onto his new incomplete permits. He was forging municipal documents to keep the construction moving forward because he could not afford the delays required to do it legally. If any primary investors ordered an independent audit, the entire project would instantly collapse. He would face federal charges for wire fraud and document forgery. I sat back staring at the web of red string and highlighted documents covering my wall. I had enough evidence to send him to prison for a very long time. But I did not want to just hand this over to the authorities quietly. I wanted him to fall from the very pedestal he had built for himself. By the end of the week, the social media circus lost its momentum. The internet has a short attention span, and Melanie's tearful videos were already becoming old news. I had completely ignored their attempts to bait me. I spent my days working at my firm and my evenings expanding the forensic profile of his imminent ruin. On a rainy Tuesday evening, I took the elevator down to the lobby to check my personal mailbox. Mixed in with the usual utility bills was a thick square envelope made of heavy textured cardstock. It was addressed to me in elegant sweeping calligraphy. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Melanie's. She had always taken immense pride in her penmanship. I ran my thumb under the heavy wax seal and pulled out the contents. It was a formal invitation, printed on thick, glossy paper with embossed gold lettering. You are cordially invited to the grand opening investor gala of the Pinnacle Luxury Residences, hosted by Derek and his new head of public relations, Melanie. They had rented out one of the most exclusive historic ballrooms in the city center. The event was scheduled for exactly 3 weeks from today. It was meant to be a lavish high society celebration, to showcase the scale models of the condos and secure the final wave of pre-sale commitments from the city's elite. Attached to the front of the heavy invitation was a small bright pink sticky note. I pulled it off and read the handwritten message. To the woman who could not keep up. Have a drink on us. Hugs and kisses, Melanie. She had actually taken the time to write out a spiteful little note and mail it to my new apartment. She wanted to twist the knife. She wanted to make sure I knew that she was now standing beside Derek at the very top of the social ladder, hosting the most anticipated real estate event of the year. I did not feel a rush of anger or a sting of jealousy. I actually felt a profound sense of calm wash over me. Her arrogance was almost beautiful in its sheer stupidity. She was so desperate to prove that she had won the grand prize that she was openly mocking me with an invitation to the scene of the crime. I slid the invitation back into the envelope and rode the elevator up to my penthouse. I walked straight over to my wall of evidence. I took a red pushpin and stuck the gold-embossed invitation right in the center of the corkboard. I took a step back and looked at the date printed on the heavy cardstock. Friday the 28th. I stared at that date until it burned itself into my memory. Something about that specific Friday was nagging at the back of my mind. I walked over to my desk and opened my laptop. I pulled up the master financial ledger for the condo project and navigated to the liabilities tab. I scrolled down past the stolen venture capital funds and the fake expense reports until I found the original mezzanine financing documents. These were the massive high-interest construction loans Derek had taken out to bridge the gap between his initial funding and the final phase of building. I opened the primary loan agreement and scanned the repayment schedule. My eyes locked onto the maturity clause buried on the 12th page. The balloon payment was due in full on Friday the 28th, the exact same day as the grand opening investor gala. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with breathtaking clarity. Derek was completely out of money. He had stolen so much of the initial investor capital to fund his lavish lifestyle and his European vacations with Melanie that the business accounts were running on fumes. He could not afford to pay off the massive construction loans. If he missed that balloon payment, the lenders would seize the property, and his entire $50 million empire would evaporate overnight. I was throwing the gala as a desperate final gamble. He needed to pack a room full of wealthy investors, dazzle them with expensive champagne and fake confidence, and secure enough non-refundable pre-sale deposits to cover the debt before midnight. The entire event was a high-stakes charade designed to keep the sinking ship afloat for just one more day. If the gala failed, he would inevitably lose everything. Melanie honestly thought she was inviting me to a celebration of her glorious victory. She had no idea she was actually inviting me to the exact moment the bomb was scheduled to detonate. I reached out and gently tapped the bright pink sticky note pinned securely to the center of the board. I was definitely not going to hide away in my quiet downtown apartment. I was going to put on my very best dress and proudly attend the party. I knew exactly where Melanie would be on a Thursday morning. She was a creature of habit, especially when it came to projecting her newly acquired wealth. The espresso bar was her favorite stage. I parked 2 blocks away and walked through the morning drizzle. I was not there by accident. I had spent 3 days tracking the financial bleeding from Derek's company accounts and needed a specific piece of evidence to tie the embezzlement directly to Melanie. I needed an admission, and I knew exactly how to get it. Arrogance is a massive vulnerability, and Melanie was currently drunk on her own perceived victory. I walked through the glass doors of the coffee shop and spotted her immediately. She was sitting at a corner table bathed in natural light. She wore a pristine white cashmere sweater and was busy arranging her designer handbag and a porcelain coffee cup for a photo. She adjusted the angle of her wrist to ensure the overhead lighting caught the maximum amount of sparkle on her hand. I dropped my shoulders to look smaller and walked slowly toward her table. Melanie did not look up until I was standing directly across from her. When she finally raised her eyes from her phone screen, her initial reaction was a flash of genuine surprise followed almost instantly by a deep, satisfied smirk. She did not look embarrassed to be sitting face to face with the woman whose husband she had stolen. She looked like she had been waiting for this exact moment. "Well," she said, leaning back in her velvet chair and crossing her legs. "I certainly did not expect to see you here, Avery. I thought you would be hiding out in your little apartment licking your wounds." I kept my hands buried deep in the pockets of my trench coat and forced my voice to sound shaky and uncertain. "I just came in for a coffee," I said quietly, letting my gaze drop to the table before looking back up at her. "I did not know you would be here." It was a complete lie, but she bought it instantly. Her ego demanded that she believe I was just a sad, pathetic ex-wife. She picked up her coffee cup, and the movement was deliberately exaggerated. That was when I saw it. A massive, glittering diamond ring caught the morning light. It was a flawless emerald-cut diamond, set on a platinum band sitting squarely on her right hand. It was an unmistakable declaration of new wealth. "That is quite a ring," I said, keeping my tone perfectly fragile and laced with manufactured hurt. "I do not remember you owning anything like that when we were friends." Melanie laughed a bright, melodic sound. "Derek bought it for me yesterday," she boasted, holding her hand up to the light. "We were walking past the jeweler's on Fifth Avenue, and I fell in love with it. It is nearly 4 carats, and the clarity is absolutely perfect. He walked right in and bought it on the spot. He said I deserved something beautiful to celebrate our new life together." I swallowed hard, pretending to fight back tears. "That must have been very expensive," I murmured, acting as though the financial reality of my failed marriage was crushing me. I do not know how he could afford something like that right now. The divorce is barely started, and the condo project is taking up all his capital. Melanie leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of possessing insider knowledge. Her desire to prove her superior status completely overrode any basic common sense. "You really do not understand how his business works, do you?" she said condescendingly. "Derek is a genius. He secured a massive wave of pre-launch investor bonuses just this week. The investors are so thrilled with his vision for the luxury condos that they released extra seed funds to him personally. He used his bonus to buy the ring. He told me that when you are building an empire, you have to look the part." I kept my face perfectly still, masking the absolute triumph roaring through my veins. She had just handed me the exact weapon I needed. Derek did not get any personal investor bonuses. There were no extra seed funds released for his brilliance. He had simply taken a massive wire transfer from the designated construction escrow account and walked straight into a jewelry store. And now Melanie had just confirmed aloud that the stolen money was sitting right there on her finger. I let my shoulders slump even further, playing the role of the utterly defeated woman to absolute perfection. "I just do not understand," I whispered, letting my voice crack with fake emotion. "We were best friends for 10 years, Melanie. I trusted you. I stood by Derek when he had absolutely nothing. I paid his rent when his first 3 companies failed. I supported him. Why would you do this to me?" Melanie sighed, looking at me, not with guilt, but with profound pity. She picked up her designer sunglasses from the table and began wiping the lenses with a small cloth. "Avery, you need to stop playing the victim," she said coldly. "Derek needed a woman who understood his level of success. He is building a $50 million legacy, and he cannot be tied down by someone who only knows how to balance a spreadsheet. You were just the starter wife who paid the bills while he got on his feet. You served your purpose, but you were never going to fit into the world he is entering now. I actually understand his vision, and I know how to navigate high society. You should honestly be happy for him. He finally found his true equal." The sheer cruelty of her words hung in the quiet space between us. Hearing it from my former best friend did not hurt at all. It just confirmed that neither of them had any idea who they were actually dealing with. They both looked at me and saw a boring accountant. They never bothered to realize that accountants control the entire board. They look at numbers and see limits. I look at numbers and see absolute leverage. My quiet career gave me the ultimate advantage. I stood there for a long moment, letting her soak in her perceived victory. I nodded slowly, swiping a fake tear from the corner of my eye. "I guess you are right," I said softly. "I guess I really could not keep up with him." I turned around and walked away from her table, making sure my steps were slow and heavy. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the coffee shop and stepped back out into the damp morning air. I walked a full block down the street before my posture completely changed. My shoulders squared and my spine straightened. I pulled my hand from the pocket of my trench coat and looked down at my left wrist. I tapped the face of my smartwatch. A tiny red indicator, light blinked once, and disappeared from the digital screen, confirming that the high-definition audio recording had successfully ended. It had already automatically saved a secure copy directly to my private remote cloud server. I smiled, feeling the cold rain hit my face. I now had Melanie on a crystal-clear audio file proudly admitting that Derek bought personal luxury jewelry using investor construction funds. The mandatory divorce mediation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in a high-rise building that smelled of expensive leather and polished glass. I arrived early and sat quietly in the waiting area. I wore a simple gray cardigan and minimal makeup, looking exactly like the defeated, exhausted woman Derek expected to see. A paralegal escorted me into a corner conference room. The table was heavy dark wood. 10 minutes late, the glass door swung open. Derek walked in carrying artisanal coffee. He did not apologize or look at me. He was typing on his phone, projecting the image of a man whose time was too valuable to be wasted. Following right behind him was his attorney, Mr. Campbell. He was a notorious family law attorney known for his aggressive, ruthless tactics. He sat down, opened a thick leather binder, and pulled out a stack of documents. Mr. Campbell slid the legal papers across the polished wood table. He told me his client was prepared to be generous today, despite my recent erratic behavior. I kept my hands folded in my lap, staring at the documents. Campbell laid out the terms with brutal efficiency. He explained the custom-built house we shared was registered under a corporate entity associated with Derek, leaving me no claim to it. He stated Derek's real estate firm was a premarital asset, so I was legally entitled to absolutely 0% of its earnings. Finally, he tapped a specific paragraph. He told me Derek was willing to offer a one-time buyout of $30,000. In exchange, I would waive all rights to future spousal support and sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement regarding his business operations. $30,000. It was an incredibly insulting number after a decade of marriage. I let my shoulders slump forward, keeping my gaze fixed firmly on the table, pretending to fight back tears of humiliation. I needed them to believe I was completely crushed by their legal intimidation. Derek put his phone face down on the table and leaned back in his chair. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated smugness, unable to resist the urge to twist the knife. "You should take the deal, Avery," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "It is more there, considering you never contributed to my vision. My company is launching the new luxury condo project this Friday. By the time the weekend is over, my firm will be valued at over $50 million. You are not entitled to a single cent of that money. I built this empire on my own. You were just the starter wife who paid the utility bills while I got on my feet. You simply could not keep up with my trajectory." I forced my hands to tremble slightly as I reached out and pulled the settlement documents closer to me, taking a slow, shaky breath. "I just want this to be over," I said, letting my voice sound small and fractured. "I do not want to fight you, Derek. I do not want spousal support, and I do not want your personal bank accounts. I just want to keep what little I have left so I can start over." Mr. Campbell raised an eyebrow, asking me to clarify what exactly I was requesting. I kept my eyes downcast and pointed to a minor clause on the third page. I told them I was willing to sign away the house, the business, and any future alimony. I would gladly take the $30,000 buyout. All I wanted in return was an addendum stating I would retain absolute and sole ownership of a small obscure holding company named Apex Holdings LLC. Derek frowned and looked at his lawyer. He asked what Apex Holdings was. I answered before Campbell could look it up, making my voice sound defensive and embarrassed. I told Derek it was just a tiny private limited liability company I set up years ago to hold my modest corporate retirement funds and a few low-yield municipal bonds. I said it was basically just my personal retirement account and had absolutely nothing to do with his real estate ventures. I begged him to just let me keep my quiet retirement account so I would not have to face my 30s completely destitute. Mr. Campbell pulled out his laptop and typed the name of the LLC into his database. I watched his eyes scan the screen, knowing exactly what he was looking at. Apex Holdings LLC was registered entirely in my name. To a cursory glance from an arrogant lawyer rushing to close a settlement, it looked like nothing more than a boring shell company holding standard mutual funds. It looked completely harmless. Campbell turned to Derek and gave him a subtle nod. He leaned over and whispered that it was a negligible asset. He assured Derek that giving up a basic retirement account in exchange for a full waiver of spousal support and total protection of a $50 million firm was the best deal he would ever get. He advised his client to agree immediately before I changed my mind and asked for a proper forensic audit. Derek smiled, genuinely believing he had bullied me into the worst financial settlement in the history of family law. He thought he was walking away with a massive fortune while leaving me with pennies. He picked up his expensive fountain pen and gestured for Campbell to add the specific addendum to the final contract. The lawyer typed up the clause stipulating I would retain complete legal ownership of Apex Holdings LLC in perpetuity. He printed the revised page and slid the massive stack of paper into the center of the table. Derek did not bother to read the fine print. He signed his name with large, sweeping strokes across every required line. He practically shoved the documents toward me when he was finished. I picked up the neat, precise letters. I initialed the addendum regarding Apex Holdings LLC, ensuring the ink was perfectly legible. When the final signature was in place, Mr. Campbell collected the documents, placing them securely in his leather folder. He told us the mediation was concluded, and the judge would finalize the paperwork by the end of the week. Derek stood up and buttoned his suit jacket, looking down at me one last time with a mixture of pity and supreme arrogance. You really should have learned to support my dreams, Avery, he said casually. Maybe then you would be standing on the red carpet with me this Friday, instead of sitting here with nothing. Have a nice life. He walked out of the conference room without waiting for a response. Mr. Campbell followed closely behind him, looking extremely satisfied with his morning work. I remained seated at the heavy dark wood table alone in the quiet room. I looked at the door they had just walked through and felt a profound sense of absolute victory wash over my entire body. Derek had just successfully bullied me into keeping Apex Holdings LLC. I was incredibly smug because he thought he was protecting his $50 million company from my greedy hands. He did not know Apex Holdings was not just a retirement account. He did not know my boring little shell company was the exact entity that had quietly bailed out his failing business 2 years ago. Derek's lawyer had just enthusiastically advised his client to sign a legally binding document granting me undisputed ownership of the very company that held the 60% majority shareholder rights to Derek's entire real estate development firm. Derek thought he had just won the divorce. He had no idea he had just legally signed away the keys to his own empire. The trap had not just snapped shut. He had willingly handed me the padlock and the key. All I had to do now was wait for his grand opening gala on Friday. I sat in the heavy leather chair for a long time after Derek and his lawyer left the room. The silence was thick and satisfying. I looked down at the copy of the settlement agreement resting on the polished mahogany table. The ink on Derek's signature was barely dry, but its legal weight was already absolute. He had walked out of this building fully believing he had secured his $50 million empire. I thought he had outsmarted me by throwing a $30,000 bone and letting me keep a boring retirement account. He had absolutely no idea that his entire reality was built on an illusion I had carefully crafted 2 years ago. 2 years ago, his real estate development firm was on the brink of total collapse. His original co-founder, a pragmatic architect named Thomas, had realized Derek was recklessly overspending and making dangerous promises to early investors. Thomas wanted out. He wanted to liquidate his 60% majority share immediately before Derek dragged them both into bankruptcy. I remember the night Derek came home in an absolute panic. I was pacing the kitchen floor, sweating, terrified that he was about to lose everything. He did not have the liquid capital to buy Thomas out. No legitimate bank would give him a loan because his credit was already stretched to the absolute limit. He was desperate and begging anyone who would listen for a bailout. That was when I stepped in, but I did not do it as his supportive wife. I knew that if I simply handed him the money from our joint savings, he would treat it as an endless slush fund. I needed to protect our household assets from his reckless gambling. So I used the private entity I had created years earlier for my own independent investments. I used Apex Holdings LLC. I contacted Thomas directly and offered to purchase his 60% majority share in full. Thomas was so desperate to escape Derek's sinking ship that he signed the transfer agreements without asking a single question about the anonymous corporate entity buying him out. The transaction was swift, quiet, and entirely legal. I wired the funds and took control of the company from the shadows. When Derek received the formal notification that an independent holding company had purchased the majority stake, he did not even blink. He assumed Apex Holdings was just a faceless boutique venture capital firm that had finally recognized his brilliant vision for urban development. He was so relieved to be saved from financial ruin that he happily signed the revised operating agreements without a second thought. He never bothered to hire a forensic accountant to look into the shell company. He never bothered to read the fine print buried on the final pages of the massive legal contract. He was too busy celebrating his survival by booking a weekend trip to a luxury golf resort. If he had actually read the documents he signed 2 years ago, he would have seen the trap I laid. He would have seen that the majority shareholder retained the absolute right to terminate the chief executive officer for gross financial misconduct. He assumed he was the undisputed king of his castle. He never realized he was just a tenant, and I held the only key to the front door. I let him run the company because as long as he was generating revenue and expanding the portfolio, my investment was growing. I monitored the ledgers from a distance, ensuring the business remained viable while he paraded around as the visionary founder. And now, sitting in the quiet mediation room, I held the fully executed divorce settlement proving that Apex Holdings belonged solely to me. Derek's own aggressive bulldog lawyer had enthusiastically advised him to sign away his only defense. He had legally severed any claim he might have had to my holding company, thereby cementing my absolute control over his real estate firm. I carefully folded the settlement document and placed it into my leather briefcase, feeling the satisfying weight of the paper. I stood up, pushed in my heavy wooden chair, and walked out of the conference room. The receptionist in the lobby gave me a look of deep pity as I passed her desk. She probably assumed I was just another broken wife leaving with nothing after a ruthless negotiation. I gave her a polite smile, stepped into the glass elevator, and rode it down to the ground floor. The midday sun was blinding as I walked out onto the busy downtown sidewalk. The air felt charged with electricity. I had the legal authority. I had the financial evidence of his embezzlement. I had the exact timeline of his impending collapse. The balloon payment for his massive construction loans was due on Friday the 28th. The grand opening investor gala was scheduled for that exact same evening. Derek was planning to use that lavish party to secure enough blind pre-sale deposits to cover the massive hole he had blown in his accounts. He needed the city's elite to trust him. He needed his primary backer to stand on that stage and endorse his vision to the rest of the financial community. Without that endorsement, the entire event would fail, and the bank would seize the property by Monday morning. That primary backer was a man named Richard. Richard was not a naive local businessman who could be easily charmed by expensive champagne and rented luxury cars. He was a ruthless billionaire venture capitalist who built his wealth by destroying anyone who dared to waste his money. I was the lead investor for the luxury condo project, and his initial capital injection was the only reason the project had broken ground. His endorsement was the only thing keeping the other minor investors from pulling their funds. I had never met Richard personally, but as a corporate financial auditor, I knew exactly how men like him operated. They did not tolerate risk, they despised public embarrassment, and they absolutely destroyed anyone who committed corporate fraud. I walked to a quiet courtyard situated between two towering glass office buildings away from the noise of the street traffic. I sat down on a bench and opened my briefcase. I pulled out my laptop and accessed the master directory I had downloaded from Derek's synced cloud drive before I moved out. I navigated through his extensive contact list until I found Richard's private direct cellular number. It was a number Derek bragged about having, but rarely dared to use. I took a deep breath, letting the cool city breeze calm my racing heart. This was the point of no return. Once I made this call, the dominoes would begin to fall, and nothing Derek or Melanie did could stop the total destruction of their new life. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number. It rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered with a sharp, demanding tone. He simply stated his name, expecting a high-level business proposition or an immediate apology for the interruption. Richard said, keeping my voice perfectly steady and projecting absolute corporate authority. It is Avery. As the 60% majority shareholder of Derek's firm, I need to request an emergency audit. Bring the federal authorities to the gala on Friday, because we have a massive embezzlement situation that requires your immediate and undivided personal attention right now. I hung up the phone and smiled warmly. It was Tuesday evening, exactly 3 days before the grand opening investor gala. Derek and Melanie were hosting a lavish dinner party at the custom home I had spent years designing. I knew all about the party because Melanie had been broadcasting the preparations on her social media channels since Sunday morning. She had hired a private chef, brought in expensive floral arrangements, and invited a carefully curated list of local influencers and minor real estate investors. She wanted to prove to everyone that she was the perfect high society hostess, seamlessly taking over my role in the house. I sat at the kitchen island in my downtown penthouse with a cup of chamomile tea resting on the marble counter. I did not need to watch her social media feed to know exactly how the evening was unfolding. I knew the timeline down to the minute because I had orchestrated the evening's main event myself. At precisely 8 o'clock, the dinner guests would be moving from the patio into the formal dining room. They would be holding crystal wine glasses and listening to Derek boast about his upcoming $50 million launch. He would be standing at the head of the long wooden table, commanding the room, projecting the image of a flawless, brilliant visionary. And at exactly 8:15, the doorbell would ring. I had hired a premium private process serving firm that specialized in high-stakes corporate litigation. I paid them a substantial bonus to ensure the delivery happened exactly on schedule and with maximum visibility. I explicitly instructed the server not to leave the package with a domestic worker or a confused guest. He was required to hand the envelope directly to Derek, confirming his identity before walking away. I imagined the heavy oak front door swinging open. I pictured the process server standing on the manicured porch, dressed in a sharp, dark suit, completely unfazed by the sounds of the expensive dinner party echoing from the dining room. He would ask for Derek by name. Melanie would likely try to intercept the package, assuming it was a last-minute gift or a floral delivery. But the server would bypass her, completely lock eyes with Derek, and press the thick, heavy legal envelope firmly against his chest. I looked down at the digital clock on my laptop screen. It read 8:17. My cell phone began to vibrate violently against the kitchen counter. The caller ID flashed with Derek's name. I let it ring 3 times, allowing his panic and rage to build, before I slowly reached out and answered the call. I did not say hello. I simply pressed the phone to my ear and waited for him to speak. "Avery, what is this absolute garbage?" Derek screamed into the phone. His voice was so loud and frantic that I had to hold the device an inch away from my ear. I could hear the muted sounds of hushed, confused conversations in the background. He had clearly stepped out of the dining room and retreated into his private home office, but he was too furious to keep his voice down. His perfect dinner party had been completely derailed in front of his important guests. "I do not know what you are talking about, Derek," I said, keeping my tone incredibly soft and perfectly innocent. "Do not play stupid with me," he snarled. "A man in a suit just interrupted my dinner party to hand me a 48-hour notice of foreclosure. What kind of pathetic, desperate prank are you trying to pull? You are completely delusional, Avery. Our mortgage is paid in full. I have the bank statements to prove it. You cannot just fake legal documents because you are bitter and jealous." I took a slow sip of my tea. He was so incredibly arrogant. He truly believed he was invincible. "I am not talking about the primary mortgage, Derek," I replied, my voice dropping its innocent facade and taking on the cold, precise tone of a senior corporate auditor. "I am talking about the secondary financing." There was a sudden sharp silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head as his mind scrambled to understand how I knew about his secret financial maneuvers. I opened a file on my laptop and began reading the details aloud to him. "3 months ago, you realized your construction funds for the luxury condo project were dangerously low," I said, articulating every single word with absolute clarity. "You had siphoned off too much venture capital to pay for your European vacation and your expensive jewelry purchases. The contractors were threatening to walk off the site. You were desperate for cash. So you took out a massive high-interest bridge loan from a boutique commercial lender to float the project until the gala." Derek breathed heavily into the phone. "You hacked my files," he hissed. "You psychotic spy." "I did not hack anything," I reminded him quietly. "You left your cloud drive synced to my home network. But that is completely irrelevant right now. What is relevant is the collateral you used to secure that massive bridge loan. No traditional bank would give you that kind of cash without a hard asset backing it up. You did not have any liquid capital left, so you leveraged the only valuable thing you had access to. You put the custom house up as collateral." "That is my house," he snapped, his voice shaking with a mixture of terror and lingering arrogance. "I bought the land before we were married. The company owns it. I had every legal right to leverage that property to ensure my project crossed the finish line. When the pre-sales come through at the gala on Friday, I will pay off the bridge loan in full. The house is completely safe. You are just trying to cause unnecessary drama because you want to ruin my night." I was still trying to convince himself that he had everything under control. He believed he just needed to survive until Friday, and all his financial sins would be washed away by the incoming investor deposits. He was so blinded by his own ego that he could not see the trap closing around him. "You are missing a very critical piece of information, Derek," I said, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the marble counter. "Bridge loans are incredibly predatory. They are designed for short-term gaps, and they come with very strict, very unforgiving repayment terms. If you look closely at the third page of the commercial loan agreement you signed, you will see a maturity clause. The balloon payment was not due after your gala. The balloon payment was due in full yesterday at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I heard a sharp intake of breath. He had not read the fine print. He had been so focused on getting the cash to hide his embezzlement that he never bothered to check the exact due date. I missed it by 1 day. He stammered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. It is just 1 day, Avery. I will call the commercial lender in the morning. I will explain the situation. I will offer them a penalty fee and an extension. They just want their money. They do not actually want the house. In the background, I could hear Melanie's muffled voice calling his name from the hallway. She was asking him what was wrong and why he was hiding in his office while their guests were waiting in the dining room. Derek ignored her, keeping the phone pressed tightly against his ear. I smiled, looking out at the glittering city lights through my penthouse windows. "You cannot call the commercial lender in the morning, Derek," I informed him, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "The commercial lender no longer owns your debt." "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice cracking with absolute panic. When a borrower defaults on a high-risk commercial bridge loan, the debt can be immediately packaged and sold to a private buyer. I explained, outlining the financial process, as if I were teaching a junior analyst. It is a very common practice in corporate finance. A private investment firm saw that your loan was in default. They saw that the collateral was a multi-million-dollar custom-built property in a highly desirable neighborhood. They recognized a lucrative opportunity, and they purchased your defaulted debt in its entirety this morning. "Who bought it?" he yelled. "Who the hell bought my debt?" I took one final sip of my tea, enjoying the perfect warmth of the chamomile. "Apex Holdings LLC bought it," I replied smoothly. The silence that followed was absolute. He knew that name. He had just signed a legally binding divorce settlement granting me total and undisputed ownership of Apex Holdings LLC. I had tricked him into letting me keep what he thought was a worthless retirement account. He had practically shoved the pen into my hand, eager to push me out of his life. "I bought that debt yesterday, Derek," I said, letting the devastating reality sink into his arrogant mind. "You missed the balloon payment. The house is mine. You have 48 hours to pack your bags and vacate my property." The morning after I served the eviction notice started with a deceptive calmness. I arrived at my office early, stepping off the elevator into the quiet hum of the financial district. The storm I had unleashed the night before was currently localized to Derek and his immediate orbit, but I knew the shockwaves would begin rippling outward very soon. I sat at my desk, organizing the physical copies of the audit files I planned to hand directly to the federal authorities on Friday night. I was methodically highlighting the most egregious wire transfers when my office phone rang. It was my administrative assistant. Her voice sounded strained and slightly apologetic as she informed me that I had a visitor in the main lobby. She told me the woman was refusing to leave and was causing a minor scene, demanding to speak with me immediately. I asked for a name even though I already knew exactly who it was. The moment my assistant said Barbara, I instructed her to send my mother-in-law straight back to my private office. I closed my audit files and placed them securely in my desk drawer. I wanted my workspace to look completely clean and unbothered. A minute later, the heavy glass door to my office opened. Barbara stepped inside, and the transformation in her appearance was genuinely shocking. Just weeks ago, she had cornered me in the lobby of my apartment building, projecting absolute elitist superiority. She had worn perfectly pressed cashmere and a string of authentic pearls, looking down her nose at my practical career while praising her visionary son. The woman standing in front of me now was a completely different person. Her hair, which was usually styled into a flawless blowout, looked flat and unkempt. She was wearing a wrinkled beige trench coat over a plain blouse, and she was not wearing any jewelry at all. The expensive designer handbag she usually carried like a shield was clutched awkwardly in her trembling hands. Her eyes were red-rimmed and shadowed with deep dark circles, indicating she had not slept a single minute the night before. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment, as if her legs could barely support her weight. She did not sneer at me. She did not launch into a defensive tirade about how I was trying to ruin her son out of petty jealousy. Instead, she took a shaky breath and walked slowly toward the two leather guest chairs positioned in front of my desk. She sank into the nearest chair, looking incredibly small and frail. Avery, she began, her voice cracking on the very first syllable. Please, you have to stop this. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, resting my hands on the pristine surface of my desk. I looked at her without a single ounce of sympathy. Stop what exactly, Barbara? I asked, keeping my tone perfectly polite and entirely clinical. The foreclosure, she pleaded, leaning forward and gripping the edge of my desk with white knuckles. Derek called me late last night in an absolute panic. He told me you bought his commercial debt. He said you served him with a 48-hour notice to vacate the house. Avery, you cannot do this. You are going to destroy him. You are going to destroy the entire luxury condo project just days before his grand opening. If he loses that house, the investors will panic and pull out. The whole development will collapse before he can even secure the pre-sales. I watched her desperation pour out across my desk. She was begging me to save the very man who had just spent months trying to mathematically discard me. The development is already collapsing, Barbara, I stated calmly. Derek over-leveraged himself to a point of no return. I simply called the debt when he failed to meet his contractual obligations. It is standard business practice. Barbara shook her head violently, tears spilling over her lower eyelids and tracking down her pale cheeks. You do not understand, she cried, her voice rising in pitch. It is not just his company, Avery. It is my money. It is my entire future. I raised a single eyebrow, allowing her to elaborate on the confession I already knew was coming. When Derek's original partner wanted to pull out 2 years ago, Derek came to me. Barbara confessed, her words tumbling over each other in her rush to make me understand her panic. He told me he was on the verge of a massive breakthrough. He said he just needed a little more capital to keep the project afloat until the mezzanine financing came through. I believed in his vision, Avery. He is my son. So I gave him everything. I liquidated my primary retirement accounts. I took out a second mortgage on my own home. I tied every single dollar I have to my name into his real estate firm. She looked at me with wide, terrified eyes that were completely stripped of their usual arrogance. If his company goes under on Friday, I lose my house too, she sobbed. I will be completely bankrupt. I will have nothing left to live on. Please, Avery, you are a smart, practical woman. You have your successful career. You do not need to do this. I am begging you to grant him an extension on the bridge loan. Just give him until after the gala so he can secure the presale deposits. Just let him save the project so I do not lose my home. She sat there weeping openly in my office, stripping away every last ounce of her false superiority to beg for her financial life. She wanted me to feel sorry for her. She wanted me to look at an older woman facing total ruin and show her the mercy that her son had completely denied me when he thought he held all the cards. I opened my desk drawer and retrieved a single thin blue folder. I placed it on the desk and opened it facing her. I am not going to grant him an extension, Barbara, I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady register. And Derek is not going to secure any presale deposits at the gala on Friday. Do you know why? Because there is no condo project left to save. Barbara stared at the folder, her tear-filled eyes scanning the top document. It was a printed ledger sheet heavily highlighted in bright yellow ink. I told you, he needed your retirement funds to keep the construction moving forward, I explained, tapping my manicured fingernail against the highlighted rows of numbers. He told you he was building a legacy. But your son is not a builder, Barbara. He is a parasite. I reached across the desk and turned the page, revealing a series of itemized receipts stapled to bank transfer confirmations. Look at the dates I commanded. Look at the exact days your money was transferred into his business accounts. Now look at where those specific funds were routed 24 hours later. Barbara leaned closer to the documents, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold the papers still. She traced the lines of text with a trembling finger, reading the descriptions of the charges. I did not buy steel or concrete with your life savings, Barbara, I said, ruthlessly narrating the tragic reality of her blind faith. He took the $120,000 you gave him from your second mortgage, and he wired it directly into a private offshore checking account. From that account, he spent $14,000 on first-class tickets to Paris for him and Melanie. He spent $32,000 on a luxury yacht charter in the Mediterranean. And just last week, he spent another $40,000 of your retirement money buying his mistress a 4-carat emerald-cut diamond ring. Barbara let out a sound that was half gasp and half whimper. She dropped the papers as if they were physically burning her hands. She pressed her palms against her mouth, her eyes wide with absolute horror. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. "He bankrupted you to buy jewelry for a luxury travel influencer," I stated, delivering the final crushing blow without a shred of hesitation. "You enabled his arrogance for decades. You constantly told him he was a genius who deserved the finest things in life. You looked down on my steady paycheck because it was not flashy enough for your golden child. Well, Barbara, this is what his flashy lifestyle actually costs. Your entire future is currently sitting on Melanie's right hand." Barbara could not speak. The realization that her brilliant visionary son had not only failed, but had actively stolen her retirement to fund his infidelity completely broke her. Her chest heaved with deep, agonizing sobs. She realized in that terrible quiet moment that Derek had never cared about her security. He only cared about his own immediate gratification. I looked at the weeping woman sitting across from me, and I felt absolutely nothing. There was no pity in my heart for her. She had spent 10 years trying to make me feel small. She had eagerly cheered when Derek brought another woman into my home. She had enabled the monster, and now the monster had eaten her alive. I closed the blue folder and slipped it back into my desk drawer, shutting away the devastating proof of her ruin. "The foreclosure stands," I told her firmly, looking at my computer screen to indicate that our meeting was officially over. "You should go home and start packing, Barbara. You are going to need a head start." She stood up on shaky legs. She did not try to argue or beg anymore. She just turned around and stumbled out of my office, leaving the door wide open behind her. She walked blindly down the hallway, a completely ruined woman, heading back to an empty house she could no longer afford. I reached forward, pulled my door shut, and went back to my audit. The stage was perfectly set for Friday. While Barbara was stumbling out of my office, a very different kind of crisis was unfolding across town at the custom-built house. It was Wednesday morning, and Melanie was busy pretending she was the queen of a newly conquered castle. She had spent the entire morning walking through the expansive rooms, barking orders at a team of florists and event coordinators. She was finalizing the floral arrangements and the caterer's schedule for the upcoming grand opening investor gala. She wanted everything to look absolutely flawless for the social media photos she planned to post on Friday night. She was so absorbed in picking out the perfect shade of white roses that she almost did not notice the heavy manila envelope sitting on the polished mahogany entryway table. Derek had carelessly tossed the 48-hour notice of foreclosure onto the table after the process server interrupted their dinner party the night before. He was too panicked and arrogant to hide it properly. Melanie picked up the thick envelope and pulled out the legal documents. She read the bold black letters declaring the property was in default and subject to immediate seizure. Her heart must have skipped a beat, but she did not immediately panic. She simply marched straight down the hallway and pushed open the heavy double doors to Derek's home office, holding the paperwork in her manicured hand. Derek was sitting behind his massive desk, nursing a glass of scotch, even though it was barely noon. He looked completely exhausted, his tie loosened and his expensive suit jacket thrown carelessly on the floor. Melanie dropped the foreclosure notice onto his desk and demanded to know why they were being threatened with eviction just days before their massive high society debut. Derek did exactly what men like him always do when cornered by the truth. He lied with absolute terrifying ease. He let out an exaggerated sigh and rubbed his temples, acting like a man burdened by the incompetence of others. He told Melanie that it was just a massive clerical error. He claimed that I was acting like a bitter, jealous accountant and had somehow manipulated the bank's automated mailing system to send out a fake notice just to scare them. He promised her that his high-priced lawyers were already handling the situation and that the house was completely secure. He smiled his most charismatic smile and told her to focus on looking beautiful for Friday night. Melanie, wanting so desperately to believe she had secured a billionaire lifestyle, completely swallowed the lie. She smoothed her cashmere sweater, kissed his cheek, and told him she was going out to pick up her custom designer shoes for the gala. 2 hours later, Melanie walked into one of the most exclusive luxury boutiques in the city. She spent an hour trying on expensive accessories, acting every bit the wealthy real estate mogul's partner. When she finally brought her selections to the marble checkout counter, the total came to just over $4,000. She did not even blink as she reached into her designer handbag and pulled out the heavy platinum corporate card Derek had given her. It was linked directly to his primary business expense account. She handed it to the sales associate with a practiced look of total boredom. The associate swiped the card through the terminal. The machine beeped a sharp negative tone. The associate frowned, apologized politely, and swiped it a second time. Another sharp negative beep echoed through the quiet boutique. The associate looked up at Melanie with a tight, strained smile and quietly informed her that the card had been declined by the issuer. Melanie felt a hot flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. She nervously laughed it off, claiming it must be a fraud protection hold because she had been spending so much lately. She pulled out a second corporate card and handed it over. The machine declined that one too. The other wealthy customers in the boutique were beginning to stare. The sales associate placed the cards on the counter and softly asked if Melanie had another form of payment. Melanie grabbed her cards, feeling deeply humiliated, and muttered an excuse about needing to call her bank. She practically ran out of the boutique, her face burning with intense shame. As soon as she was outside, she pulled out her phone and frantically logged into the banking application for the corporate accounts. The screen loaded a massive red warning banner. Every single account was completely frozen due to an ongoing forensic audit of embezzled funds. Melanie did not think about federal investigations or corporate fraud. Her narrow, self-absorbed mind jumped to the only conclusion that made sense in her world. She assumed that I was still hacking their personal lives to punish them for falling in love. She stormed across the wet pavement and climbed into the driver's seat of my least luxury sport utility vehicle. She slammed the door shut, gripping the leather steering wheel with shaking hands. She pulled up my contact information and pressed the call button, her entitlement and rage boiling over. I was sitting at my desk, eating a quiet salad for lunch, when my personal cell phone lit up with her name. I swallowed my food, dabbed my mouth with a napkin, and answered the call, putting her on speakerphone so I could type while she spoke. "Avery, unlock Derek's money right now!" Melanie screamed into the phone the second the line connected. Her voice was shrill and completely unhinged. "I know you are the one doing this. I know you are hacking his accounts because you are a pathetic, jealous woman who cannot handle the fact that he chose me over you. You ruined my shopping trip, and you are trying to ruin our gala. Turn the credit cards back on immediately, or I am calling the police and telling them you are committing cybercrimes." I stopped typing and leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair. The sheer audacity of her demanding that I unlock stolen investor funds so she could buy designer shoes was almost comical. "I did not hack anything, Melanie," I replied, my voice calm and perfectly modulated. "I initiated a legal forensic freeze on those accounts because I am the majority shareholder of Derek's company. I simply cut off the supply of stolen venture capital seed money that you have been using to fund your entire fake lifestyle." "You are lying," she snapped, refusing to let go of her delusion. "You are just a boring accountant. Derek is a visionary. He earned those investor bonuses and he has every right to spend his own money. You are just trying to starve us out because you want him to come crawling back to you. It is not going to work, Avery. We are going to be worth $50 million on Friday, and you are going to be left with absolutely nothing." I let her finish her frantic defensive rant. I let her cling to the beautiful, fragile illusion of her stolen wealth for just one more second. Then I reached forward and clicked a file on my computer desktop. It was the high-definition audio recording from the coffee shop. "Listen very carefully, Melanie," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet pitch. I hit the play button. The clear, crisp audio filled the line. Melanie's own melodic voice echoed through the speakers, bragging loudly about her 4-carat emerald-cut diamond ring. "Derek bought it for me yesterday," her recorded voice boasted. "He secured a massive wave of pre-launch investor bonuses just this week. He used his bonus to buy the ring." I paused the recording right there. The silence on the other end of the phone was absolute. I could hear Melanie taking quick, shallow breaths in the driver's seat of my car. The arrogant, entitled mistress had instantly vanished, replaced by a terrified woman realizing the gravity of her own words. The Securities and Exchange Commission has this audio recording now. Melanie, I told her, delivering the final crushing reality with absolute precision. That ring on your finger was purchased with stolen construction funds. You just confessed to knowingly receiving embezzled capital. You are not a high society hostess. You are an accessory to federal wire fraud. There was a sharp clattering sound as Melanie dropped her cell phone onto the floorboard of the car in sheer, unadulterated terror. 3 days remained until the grand opening investor gala. It was Tuesday evening, and while I sat in the quiet sanctuary of my downtown penthouse, a very different scene was unfolding at my former residence. Derek and Melanie were hosting an exclusive, highly curated dinner party at the custom-built home I had spent years designing. I knew about the lavish event because Melanie had been broadcasting the preparations on her public social media channels since Sunday. She had hired a private chef, brought in extravagant floral arrangements, and invited a carefully selected list of local influencers and minor real estate investors. She was desperate to prove to everyone that she was the perfect high society hostess, seamlessly sliding into my place and elevating Derek's lifestyle. I did not need to watch her live updates to know exactly how the evening was progressing. I knew the timeline down to the precise minute because I had personally orchestrated the main event of the night. At exactly 8 o'clock, the dinner guests would be moving from the expansive outdoor patio into the formal dining room. They would be holding crystal wine glasses and listening to Derek boast about his upcoming $50 million launch. He would be standing at the head of the long wooden table commanding the room, projecting the flawless image of a brilliant visionary developer. And at exactly 8:15, the doorbell would ring. I had hired a premium private process serving firm that specialized in high-stakes corporate litigation. I paid them a substantial bonus to ensure the delivery happened exactly on schedule. I explicitly instructed the server not to leave the package with anyone but Derek. He was legally required to hand the thick, heavy envelope directly to Derek, confirming his identity before walking away. I imagined the heavy oak front door swinging open. I pictured the process server standing on the manicured porch, dressed in a sharp, dark suit, completely unfazed by the sounds of the expensive dinner party. Melanie would likely try to intercept the package, but the server would bypass her, completely lock eyes with Derek, and press the legal documents firmly against his chest. I looked down at the digital clock on my laptop screen. It read 8:17. My cell phone began to vibrate violently against the marble kitchen counter. The caller ID flashed with Derek's name. I let it ring 3 times, allowing his panic to build to a boiling point, before I slowly reached out and answered the call. I simply pressed the phone to my ear and waited for him to speak. "Avery, what is this absolute garbage?" Derek screamed into the phone. I had to hold the device an inch away from my ear. I could hear the muted sounds of hushed, confused conversations in the background. He had clearly stepped out of the dining room and retreated into his private home office, locking the door behind him, but he was too furious to keep his voice down. His perfect dinner party had been completely derailed in front of his most important guests. "I do not know what you are talking about, Derek," I said, keeping my tone incredibly soft and perfectly innocent. "Do not play stupid with me," he snarled, pacing the floorboards of his office. A man in a suit just interrupted my dinner party to hand me a 48-hour notice of foreclosure. "What kind of pathetic, desperate prank are you trying to pull? You are completely delusional, Avery. Our primary mortgage is paid in full. I have the bank statements to prove it. You cannot just fake legal documents because you are bitter and jealous that I moved on." I truly believed he was invincible. "I am not talking about the primary residential mortgage, Derek," I replied, my voice dropping its innocent facade and taking on the cold, precise tone of a senior corporate auditor. "I am talking about the secondary commercial financing." There was a sudden, sharp silence on the other end of the line. I began reading the details aloud to him. "3 months ago, you realized your construction funds for the luxury condo project were dangerously low," I said, articulating every single word with absolute clarity. "You had siphoned off too much venture capital to pay for your European vacation and your expensive personal jewelry purchases. The contractors were threatening to walk off the site. You were desperate for cash. So you took out a massive high-interest bridge loan from a boutique commercial lender to float the project until the gala." Derek breathed heavily into the phone. You hacked my files, he hissed. I did not hack anything, I reminded him quietly. You left your cloud drive synced to my home network. But that is completely irrelevant right now. What is relevant is the collateral you used to secure that massive bridge loan. No traditional bank would give you that kind of cash without a hard asset backing it up. You leveraged the only valuable thing you had left. You put the custom house up as collateral. That is my house, he snapped, his voice shaking with a mixture of terror and lingering arrogance. I bought the land before we were married. The company owns it. I had every legal right to leverage that property to ensure my project crossed the finish line. When the pre-sales come through at the gala on Friday, I will pay off the bridge loan in full. The house is completely safe. You are just trying to cause unnecessary drama because you want to ruin my night. I was still trying to convince himself that he had everything under control. He believed he just needed to survive until Friday, and all his financial sins would be washed away by the incoming investor deposits. He was so blinded by his own ego that he could not see the trap closing around him. You are missing a very critical piece of information, Derek, I said, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the marble counter. Bridge loans are incredibly predatory. They are designed for short-term gaps, and they come with very strict, very unforgiving repayment terms. If you look closely at the third page of the commercial loan agreement you signed, you will see a maturity clause. The balloon payment was not due after your gala. The balloon payment was due in full yesterday at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I heard a sharp intake of breath. He had never bothered to check the exact due date. I missed it by 1 day, he stammered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. It is just 1 day, Avery. I will call the commercial lender in the morning. I will explain the situation. I will offer them a penalty fee and an extension. In the background, I could hear Melanie calling his name from the hallway. Derek ignored her, keeping the phone pressed tightly against his ear. You cannot call the commercial lender in the morning, Derek, I informed him, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. When a borrower defaults on a high-risk commercial bridge loan, the debt can be sold privately. An investment firm purchased your defaulted debt this morning. Who bought it? He yelled into the phone. Apex Holdings LLC bought it, I replied smoothly. The silence that followed was absolute. He had just signed undisputed ownership to me. I bought that debt yesterday. The house is mine. Leave now. My husband believed he had executed the perfect betrayal when he packed his bags for a 20-day solo networking trip to Europe. He did not know that I had already uncovered the digital trail, proving my best friend was sharing his luxury suite the entire time. When he finally walked through our front door expecting a warm embrace, I did not waste my breath screaming or throwing plates. I simply slid a sealed medical envelope across the kitchen island and asked him one terrifying question about a devastating diagnosis. He did not even try to deny his infidelity. He dropped his keys, turned around, and sprinted straight to his car. My name is Avery, and I am 33 years old. I work as a corporate financial auditor for one of the largest firms in Texas. My entire career is built on finding discrepancies that people try very hard to hide. I track missing funds. I notice when the numbers do not add up. I find the lies buried deep in spreadsheets, expense reports, and tax documents. I do not react to anomalies with raw emotion. I react with investigation. I gather data. I look for patterns. I build a case so solid that it cannot possibly be refuted in a boardroom. So when my husband Derek started acting strangely a few months ago, my professional instincts naturally kicked in. Derek is 35 years old and the founder of a luxury real estate development firm. He has always been an arrogant man. He is the kind of person who believes he is the smartest and most visionary person in any room he walks into. Over the past few years, we built a beautiful custom home in an upscale neighborhood in Austin. It has floor-to-ceiling windows, imported marble countertops, and a driveway large enough for his expensive vehicles. To the outside world, we were the perfect power couple. But behind closed doors, Derek was constantly seeking validation, and he recently found it in the worst possible place. Melanie was my best friend. She is also 33, a luxury travel influencer who curates a perfectly filtered life on social media. She always had a taste for the finer things in life, usually paid for by other people. I never imagined she would set her sights on my husband. It was a Tuesday evening when Derek was scheduled to return from his so-called solo business trip. For 20 days, I had played the role of the supportive and oblivious wife. I answered his brief phone calls where he complained about exhausting meetings in Paris and long train rides along the Amalfi Coast. I listened to his fabricated stories about difficult investors and late-night strategy sessions. Those 20 days were the longest of my life. During the day, I went to my office and audited corporate mergers. At night, I sat in our massive empty house and audited my marriage. I looked back at the late nights he claimed to be working the weekend retreats. Melanie took that mysteriously aligned with his business trips and the inside jokes they shared at our dinner parties. The signs had been there all along, hiding in plain sight. Earlier that week, I was helping manage some of Melanie's mail while she was supposedly on a brand-sponsored wellness retreat in Bali. A notification from her medical clinic arrived in her digital inbox. As her designated emergency contact, I had access to her patient portal from a time she had a severe allergic reaction last year. I logged in out of habit to make sure she was all right. The test results showed a minor iron deficiency. It was nothing serious at all. But staring at that official clinic letterhead on my screen, a brilliant idea formed in my mind. I needed a test so absolute and shocking that Derek would not have a single second to formulate one of his smooth lies. I printed a blank document, folded it, and placed it inside a replica of the clinic envelope. I was sitting at the kitchen island with my laptop open when I heard the familiar rumble of his engine pulling into the driveway. My heart beat a little faster, but I forced my breathing to remain slow and steady. I had spent the last 3 weeks grieving the end of my marriage in private. Now there was no room for tears or emotional breakdowns. There was only the audit. The front door opened and shut. I heard the heavy thud of his designer luggage hitting the hardwood floor of the foyer. "Avery, I am home," he called out. His voice echoed through the house, carrying that familiar tone of entitlement and confidence. He walked into the kitchen looking tanned and entirely too relaxed for a man who had supposedly spent 3 weeks trapped in windowless boardrooms. The smell of his expensive cologne mixed with the scent of stale airplane air. He wore a crisp white button-down shirt and tailored slacks. He carelessly tossed his suit jacket over a dining chair, fully expecting me to pick it up later. I expected me to rush over, kiss his cheek, and ask him how his stressful trip went. He expected a hot dinner waiting on the stove and a wife eager to hear his stories. I did not look up from my laptop screen. I kept my fingers moving across the keyboard, typing a meaningless document just to maintain the facade of total indifference. "Welcome back," I said quietly. My voice was steady, betraying none of the absolute rage boiling beneath the surface. He paused, clearly thrown off by my lack of enthusiasm. He let out an exaggerated sigh, running a hand through his hair to emphasize how incredibly tired he was. "It was a brutal trip, Avery. Absolutely brutal," he complained, walking closer to the island. "The investors in Paris were completely unreasonable and demanding. I must have slept 4 hours a night the entire time. I just want to take a long hot shower and eat something that does not come from a hotel room service menu. What is for dinner tonight?" I finally stopped typing. I slowly closed my laptop and looked up at him. He was standing near the edge of the kitchen island, a confident smirk playing on his lips. He really believed he had gotten away with it. He believed I was just the practical, boring numbers girl who kept his life stable while he went out and conquered the world with my best friend. I reached beside my laptop and picked up the white envelope bearing the logo of Melanie's health clinic. I looked him dead in the eye and pushed the envelope across the smooth marble surface. It slid silently and stopped exactly an inch from his hand. He looked down at it, his brow furrowing in confusion. Then I delivered the line I had been practicing in my head for days. "Melanie called me sobbing this morning," I said, making sure my voice remained perfectly level and serious. "Her routine panel came back positive for HIV. Did you know?" I watched his face closely. I watched the arrogant smirk vanish in a fraction of a second. The deep tan he had acquired on the Amalfi Coast seemed to wash away instantly, leaving him completely ashen and pale. He stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. For a man who built his entire career on smooth talking and quick pitches, he was suddenly completely speechless. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I took a staggering step back, bumping heavily against the leather bar stool. The car keys he was still holding slipped from his trembling fingers and crashed onto the floor. He did not even bend down to pick them up. The sheer panic in his eyes was absolute and undeniable. His mind was clearly racing, calculating risks, realizing that his own health and life were suddenly in serious jeopardy. The instinct for self-preservation completely overrode his ability to deny the affair or construct an alibi. He looked at me with a gaze full of pure, unadulterated terror, and then he turned around. He did not ask what I meant. He did not ask why I was bringing up my best friend out of nowhere. He did not try to tell me he had no idea what I was talking about. He just turned and sprinted back toward the foyer. I listened to his heavy footsteps pounding against the floorboards, the frantic twisting of the front doorknob, and the heavy door slamming shut behind him. He had a spare key fob in his pocket. Seconds later, I heard his car engine roar to life. The tires squealed violently against the pavement as he reversed out of our long driveway at top speed, racing straight toward the nearest medical clinic. The silence that settled over the house was profound and incredibly satisfying. I stood up from my stool, walked calmly through the hallway, and turned the deadbolt on the front door. The loud click echoed in the quiet space. I leaned against the heavy wood and allowed myself a genuine smile. Melanie did not have HIV. She just needed to take a daily iron supplement. But Derek did not know that. I had set a trap, and his own guilt had pushed him right into it. He had confirmed everything I knew without uttering a single word. My heart was completely broken, but my mind was sharper than ever. He thought he was playing a game with a naive wife. He was about to find out what happens when a corporate financial auditor decides to balance the scales. The evening of the grand opening investor gala finally arrived, bringing with it a heavy, chilling rain that washed over the slick streets of downtown Seattle. The venue was a spectacular historic ballroom, known for hosting the most elite and exclusive high society events in the entire city. Derek had spared absolutely no expense in his desperate bid to maintain the illusion of his massive wealth. He had rented out the entire building, filling the cavernous space with towering floral arrangements of white orchids and hiring a small army of staff to serve expensive vintage champagne to his guests. The room was packed with the most influential tech investors, real estate moguls, and prominent socialites in the region. I arrived at the venue in the back of a sleek black town car. I wore a stunning floor-length emerald green designer gown that perfectly projected absolute confidence and complete control. I did not arrive alone. Sitting beside me in the spacious back seat was Richard, the ruthless billionaire venture capitalist who served as the primary lead investor for the luxury condo project. We had spent the last 2 days meticulously reviewing every single piece of financial evidence I had gathered. Richard was a man who despised being lied to, and he despised losing his money even more. Sitting in the front passenger seat were 2 federal agents in plain clothes holding secure briefcases containing the formal warrants for Derek and his entire operation. The town car pulled up to the curb just outside the main entrance. A valet opened my door and I stepped out onto the damp pavement, holding my posture perfectly straight. Richard stepped out beside me, offering his arm in a show of absolute solidarity. We walked together past the flashing cameras of the local paparazzi and through the heavy brass doors of the historic ballroom. The federal agents followed a few steps behind us, blending seamlessly into the crowd of wealthy attendees. The atmosphere inside the ballroom was electric with manufactured excitement. Scale models of the $50 million luxury condo development were displayed under bright theatrical spotlights in the center of the room. Waiters carrying silver trays glided effortlessly through the crowd. I stood near the back of the room, remaining hidden in the shadows as I watched the performance unfolding on the main stage. Derek was standing at a sleek acrylic podium, bathed in the glowing light of a massive digital projection screen. The screen behind him displayed glossy, high-definition architectural renderings of his imaginary real estate empire. He wore a custom-tailored velvet tuxedo jacket and held a cordless microphone in his hand. He was currently delivering a charismatic, highly rehearsed speech about his journey to the top of the industry. He spoke with incredible arrogance, boasting about building a legacy from scratch through pure blood sweat and visionary leadership. He paced across the stage like a conquering king, feeding entirely on the polite applause of the wealthy investors he was actively defrauding. He paused his speech to smile warmly and point directly to the front row of the audience. He told the crowd that a visionary man is nothing without a strong, supportive woman standing by his side. Melanie was sitting in the very center of the front row wearing a skin-tight silver evening gown. She raised her right hand to tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear, making absolutely certain that the bright overhead spotlights caught the flawless sparkle of the 4-carat emerald-cut diamond ring sitting on her finger. She looked up at Derek with an expression of pure adoring triumph. I decided it was time to end the show. I released Richard's arm and began walking slowly and deliberately down the center aisle of the ballroom. The emerald fabric of my gown swept silently across the plush carpeting. As I moved deeper into the room, the guests nearest to me slowly stopped talking and turned to stare. The sea of tailored suits and expensive dresses naturally parted to clear a path for me. Derek was in the middle of asking the investors to visualize the future when his eyes finally found me, walking down the aisle. His voice completely died in his throat. He froze mid-sentence, staring at me, as if a ghost had just drifted into his perfect celebration. The sudden heavy silence from the stage caused the rest of the room to quiet down and turn their attention toward the center aisle. Two large private security guards wearing earpieces immediately stepped forward from the sides of the room, moving to intercept me before I could reach the stage steps. Before they could even raise their hands to stop me, Richard stepped out from the crowd and spoke with a booming, authoritative voice that echoed through the silent ballroom. He commanded the security guards to stand down immediately and let me speak. Because Richard was the undisputed lead financial backer of the entire project, his word carried absolute power. The guards instantly stepped back and lowered their heads, deferring to his authority. I walked up the short flight of carpeted stairs and stepped onto the brightly lit stage. I walked directly over to the acrylic podium where Derek was standing, completely paralyzed by sheer panic. I reached out and calmly took the cordless microphone right out of his trembling hand. He was so utterly shocked by my presence and by Richard's public endorsement that he did not even try to resist. I set my leather portfolio down on the podium and pulled out my digital tablet. I took the small display cable resting near the microphone stand and plugged it directly into my device. The massive projection screen behind us flickered for a brief second. The beautiful glossy architectural renderings of the luxury condos completely vanished. They were instantly replaced by a stark black and white financial spreadsheet displaying rows of highly detailed banking data. I raised the microphone to my lips. My voice echoed through the massive historic ballroom, carrying absolutely no trace of sadness, anger, or hesitation. I told the room of wealthy investors that Derek had just spoken eloquently about the cost of visionary leadership. I announced that I was there to show them exactly what that leadership actually cost them. I tapped the screen of my tablet. The massive projector displayed the complete 20-day flight and hotel itinerary for the European vacation. The names Derek and Melanie were clearly highlighted in bright yellow ink across the top of the booking confirmation. I tapped the screen a second time, bringing up the itemized banking receipts. I calmly explained to the silent room that they were looking at $65,000 of their venture capital seed money. I narrated how their investments had been directly wired into offshore accounts to pay for private yachts in Amalfi luxury shopping sprees in Paris, and the 4-carat diamond ring currently sitting in the front row. A collective murmur of shock and rising anger swept through the wealthy crowd. I did not give them time to process the theft before I tapped the screen a third time. The vacation receipts disappeared and were replaced by the municipal construction and environmental zoning permits for the condo project. I pointed out the digital signatures of the city inspectors at the bottom of the documents. I calmly informed the investors that the signatures were completely fabricated. I explained that Derek had been forging federal and municipal legal documents to hide the fact that he was entirely out of construction funds. The murmurs in the crowd grew into loud, angry voices as the investors realized they were looking at undeniable proof of massive corporate fraud. Derek finally snapped out of his paralyzed state of shock. The reality of his total public destruction overrode his initial terror and fueled a desperate burst of adrenaline. He lunged forward toward the podium and tried to forcefully yank the microphone out of my hand. I smoothly stepped to the side, keeping the device safely out of his reach while maintaining my perfect composure. He turned to face the crowd of furious investors and raised his voice to a frantic shout, trying to project over their angry demands for an explanation. He waved his arms wildly and told the room that I was nothing but a disgruntled, bitter ex-wife. He screamed that I was mentally unstable and deeply jealous of his success and his new relationship. He insisted that I had illegally hacked into his personal computer to fabricate these documents just to ruin his reputation out of petty spite. He puffed out his chest and declared to the entire ballroom that I had absolutely no legal authority to be standing on his stage or speaking about the internal finances of his company. I looked at him with a cold, steady gaze, allowing him to completely exhaust his frantic defensive tirade. When he finally stopped shouting and stood there breathing heavily, I turned my attention back to my digital tablet. I slowly swiped my finger across the smooth glass screen. The image on the massive projector behind us shifted one final time. The forged construction permits faded away. A high-definition scan of a deeply familiar legal document filled the massive screen. It was the finalized and fully executed divorce mediation settlement. Derek's large, sweeping signature was clearly visible at the bottom of the page, verifying his absolute agreement to the terms. Right. Next to the settlement document appeared the official state-registered operating agreement for a private entity named Apex Holdings, LLC. I raised the microphone back to my lips. The ballroom fell completely silent again, waiting for my response to his frantic accusations. I introduced myself properly to the room of elite investors. I stated my full name and my profession as the senior corporate financial auditor. I directed their attention to the massive screen behind me. I announced that 2 years ago, a private entity named Apex Holdings, LLC had quietly purchased the 60% majority share of Derek's failing real estate development firm, saving it from total bankruptcy. I then read the specific highlighted clause from the divorce settlement projected on the screen. I explained that according to the legally binding document Derek had enthusiastically signed, just a few days ago he had completely surrendered any and all claims to Apex Holdings LLC in perpetuity. I turned my body to face Derek directly. He was staring up at the massive projection screen. All the color had completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow shell of a man. His eyes were locked onto his own bold signature at the bottom of the divorce agreement. I spoke into the microphone, ensuring every single person in the room heard my final declaration. I stated that as the sole undisputed owner of Apex Holdings LLC, I was the 60% majority shareholder of his entire real estate development firm. I told him that I had the absolute legal authority to dictate the future of the company. I announced that I was officially terminating him as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately, for gross financial misconduct, document forgery, and federal wire fraud. The ballroom absolutely erupted into total chaos. The elite investors began shouting furiously, demanding their money back and calling for security. Richard stood near the front of the stage, looking incredibly satisfied with the flawless execution of the financial audit. Melanie jumped up from her seat in the front row, looking completely horrified as the wealthy crowd turned their angry glares toward her and the stolen diamond on her hand. Derek continued to stare up at the massive screen, his entire body trembling violently. The arrogant illusion he had spent years building had completely shattered in a matter of minutes. He finally realized that his smug attempt to secure a $50 million empire with a pathetic $30,000 divorce settlement had actually stripped him of everything he had ever owned. He realized he had willingly handed me the loaded weapon and enthusiastically begged me to pull the trigger. Looking back on the ashes of my marriage and the rise of my new life, I learned one absolute truth. People can construct the most elaborate lies to protect their arrogance, but numbers never lie. When you find yourself betrayed by the people you trusted most, your initial instinct will be to scream, to cry, and to demand an explanation. Do not give them that satisfaction. Raw emotion is a weapon they will use against you to label you unstable. Instead, give them silence. Use that silence to observe, to plan, and to audit the reality of your situation. True power does not come from winning a screaming match. It comes from maintaining your absolute composure while you quietly dismantle the very foundation they stand on. You do not have to accept the role of the broken victim. You can choose to be the architect of your own justice. Have you ever discovered a massive betrayal hiding in plain sight? How did you gather the strength to walk away on your own terms? Share your stories of finding out the truth and taking back your power in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about resilient strategy and surviving the ultimate betrayals. Remember, the best revenge is simply becoming untouchable.